Archwilio Iechyd a Gofal Digidol Cymru. Good morning and welcome to the Digital Health and Care Wales Audit and Assurance Committee meeting. I'd like to welcome you all here, but in particular our two new independent members who recently joined DHCW and specifically this committee. They are Marilyn Bryan-Jones and Alistair Neil, who takes the role of Vice Chair of this committee. So I'd like to take this opportunity, if I may, to invite both Marilyn and then Alistair to introduce yourselves briefly, if you may. Thank you.
My name is Marilyn Bryan-Jones and I'm a new member to Digital Healthcare Wales, and I'm really pleased to be part of this committee. I come with a background of equality, diversity and inclusion, and I hope my experience will be valuable to this committee. Thank you. Thank you,
Marilyn. Croeso. And Alistair?
Yes, good morning. It's very good to be part of this committee. Marianne, thank you for the invitation to join and be Vice Chair. My background is I've been a chief executive in the private sector, multinationals for about 10 years, and then for the following 20 years, a chief executive of 3 local authorities. And most recently, I went to the dark side by becoming a councillor. And so I hope to bring some of the experience from private and public sector into the work that you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair. Diolch yn fawr, and you're both very welcome. Let me also welcome our Director of Planning and Performance and Chief Commercial Officer, Michelle Sell, who is this morning deputising for Ivan Evans, our Executive Director of Strategy. Welcome also to Lee Mullin, Programme Director for WCCIS, who will be attending on the follow-up report following its receipt by the Public Accounts and Public Administration Committee. And finally, we will also welcome Seth Newman from Audit Wales. But before we begin our formal agenda, I'd like to take this opportunity to inform you that independent member David Selway has now left the Audit and Assurance Committee following the 2 new appointments, and I'd like to express our thanks to David for his commitment and his contribution to the committee over the last 18 months. Please note once again that since our last committee meeting back in July, I have met with colleagues from internal and external audit. That was on the 20th of September, and I'd like to extend my thanks to them for taking time to go through things in advance of this meeting. So, as is usual, today's committee meetings are available for the public to access via the DHCW website, and a recording of this committee will be posted on the website once we finalise our agenda today. We will make time for a comfort break. We have a full agenda, and I assume you've all had the chance to read the papers in advance, but we will take a short break, hopefully between sections 4 and 5 on this agenda. We are scheduled to finish by about 12:15, and there will be a 5-minute break before our planned private session, which is scheduled to begin at 12:20. So with those preliminaries, apologies for absence. I've been notified of the following: Ivan Evans, Executive Director of Strategy, and Julie Francis, Head of Commercial Services. Let's turn then to item 1.3, which is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest on any matter on today's agenda? I've not been notified of any. But I should perhaps just declare an interest in respect of agenda item 5.3 on the Welsh language as chair of the Task and Finish group for Mwy na Geiriau. And that brings us then to part 2 and the consent agenda. And to ensure that we are able to focus on business critical activity, I shall be using the consent agenda with your support. I'm assuming that you've all read the papers under the consent section, and can I just check whether you're all happy with the consent agenda as it stands, or is there any matter you'd like to put up for further discussion on the main agenda? No? Then if not, I propose that we are happy to approve and note all items as requested, and they are specifically, we are approving minutes from item 2.1 from our committee meeting held on July the 4th. We are noting the contents of item 2.2 of the NHS Wales Shared Services Partnership Assurance Committee from the 21st of July of this year. We are noting the contents of the forward work plan, item 2.3, which includes items that are scheduled to come to future committee meetings. We are noting the COVID inquiry update, item 2.4, noting the decarbonisation report, item 2.5. We are noting the Quality and Engagement Act update, item 2.6, and approving the 3 policies as outlined in item 2.7. And finally, we are noting the integrated medium-term plan report, item 2.8. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all those who've helped draft those papers, which we've approved under the consent agenda. So I'll move us on then straight to section 3 and the main agenda of this meeting. And let's start then with the action log. And as you'll see, there are 2 actions captured from our last committee meeting held on July the 4th, both of which have been completed. But can I check, are there any queries in relation to those 2 actions at all? No, in that case then we are being asked to note the action log status, which we do. And then on to part 4 and the audit and counter fraud section. And this opens part 4 of the main agenda. And I'm delighted now
Chair,
to hand
could
over.
I possibly ask for a quick question in terms of actions? Thank you. Sorry, I put my hand up, but I just wanted to say that before you move on. Thank you, Chair. It's just really a request whether it would be possible, given that on this agenda there are 371 pages, whether it would be possible to actually not simply say how many pages each section might be, but actually what page numbers they're at, so it becomes a lot more manageable to follow, from agenda summary to actually find items on an agenda. I don't know if I'm unique in that sort of, issue, just struggling for that, but would it be possible? I don't know, that this might be something for agenda setting, whether it's possible to actually say what page numbers the agenda items are at. That would be, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll certainly look at that, Alistair, in future. If it was helpful, I'm sure we'll take a positive look at that. And thank you very much for raising it. Are there any other questions or comments? I can't see any hands up. So let's then turn to the internal audit progress report and plan. And I'd like to hand over now to the Director of Audit and Assurance, Simon Cookson, at Internal Audit, to go through the progress report. And perhaps then, Simon, you can hand over then formally to your deputy, Stephen Cheney, to take us through the internal audit review reports. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Chair, and Bore da, good morning, everyone. Just to pick up Alistair's points, we're on pages 118 to 125 of the pack in terms of the progress report, and a very quick update from me. In terms of the overall programme of 14 reviews, you have 3 to consider today, 2 as part of this agenda and 1 in the private agenda later. And we have 3 reviews that are in draft at the moment, just waiting to clear management responses around switching services, financial sustainability and engagement. We would have liked to have, Chair, to have got a couple more to this audit committee meeting, so that's a little bit disappointing all around. But the work is complete, the reports are there, and they'll be through to the next meeting. And in terms of getting on with the rest of the programme, work in progress and planning, that is on course. So nothing else I wanted to say, Chair, in terms of the progress report, but happy to take any questions if there are any.
So you've heard that update from Simon. Are there any questions from colleagues? No, I don't think there are then.
Okay, in which case then we've got 2 substantive reports. I'll hand over to Stephen for the audit recommendation tracker, but then I'll pick up the decarbonisation audit at 4.2, as that links into the paper that was noted at 2.5 around the decarbonisation action plan, and will link into paper 5.10 a little bit later, and the decarbonisation elements of the wider estates compliance report. So, Chair, if you're comfortable, I'll hand over to Stephen for the audit recommendation tracker report.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Simon. This report, which starts on page 133, is around the recommendation tracker, and we looked at the mechanisms in place for tracking internal and external recommendations that are coming through DHCW and how they're being resolved and prioritised. Generally, overall, it was a positive outcome. We found that recommendations, with the exception of 1, were all being tracked appropriately, and the mechanisms and the process for doing so were robust and strong. We did raise a number of recommendations to further refine the process and improve it, particularly around the prioritisation of those recommendations. So during the point of the audit, we found that high, medium priority recommendations may not be prioritised any more so than a low priority recommendation. And I'm pleased to say that a lot of these recommendations were embedded during the point of the audit and have since been actioned, given it was a number of months ago now. So generally, it was a positive picture overall, and just some points around further refinement, but there was nothing of considerable note to flag up with that review. And I think that sort of wraps that one up, but I shall now pass you back to Simon, unless there are any questions. Like, see, Ruth has a hand up.
Diolch, Stephen. I've got a couple of hands up, so I'll turn first of all then to Ruth Glazard, who's Vice Chair of DHCW. Bore da, Ruth.
Bore da, Marion, diolch. And thank you for that summary, Stephen. I think once I'd got my head around us auditing the tracking of our auditing actions, this was actually quite clear, so thank you. I just had a question about the prioritisation piece, and I guess it's great to hear we are treating all actions, whether they've been medium, high or low, as important as each other. And my guess would be we're able to do that at the moment because we don't have lots and lots of actions. But did you get the sense that we would prioritise them in order if we had more to do? I'm pleased that people take all the actions equally seriously, I think is my point. But if we had more, have we got stuff in place to prioritise them in order?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a funny one, really. What we do generally find with DHCW is recommendations, irrespective of priority, are generally addressed very quickly, which is good. But it is quite possible that a scenario would arise whereby a high priority recommendation may take 12, 15 months to resolve. So a lot of it will be done based upon the actual time that it will take. So in that sense, there is isn't a need for a prioritisation of the recommendations in reality, but equally there should be as well. If something takes 15 months to do, what we're finding is that work is underway to address that. And equally, if something takes 3 months, it'll take 3 months, and it's almost becomes irrelevant with the priority ratings. So DHCW, and compared to our other clients, does have a very short recommendation tracker. That may increase as time goes on, but we also did find that there was very good closure and progress against those recommendations. So the risk is probably quite low in that sense.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Ruth. Chris, did you want to respond directly to Ruth's query? No. Okay, well, I'll turn to Claire Osmondson-Little then, our Director of Finance, for the next question or observation.
So actually, Ruth, you were building on what I was going to say. The volume of actions we've had, we drove them down quite significantly. And obviously, as you can see, the audit plan going forward, we've got quite a number of audits. So I think for me, there's a couple of things. I honestly think we treat every action equally. And as we get more reds, actually, the prioritisation of those actions will be more of a focus for us and a good learning going forward. I think it also highlights the need to have greater granularity in perhaps some of the reporting that we've done, and we'll take that on board in terms of that. And the final point for me is the internal audit plan that we're now doing as part of the quality plan. For me, that may be an opportunity for us to actually highlight taking up and auditing one of the audit actions in that forum under the banner of quality. So I think it was quite a helpful audit at this point, because we are going to see more audit actions coming through. And I think for us as a committee, but also as an organisation, being able to manage those more effectively in the way that we report and action will be really helpful. So yeah, I thought it was a really helpful audit report in that sense.
That link to quality is really helpful. Thank you, Claire. That makes my head explode a little bit less when we're checking our check-in.
Thank you. Let me turn now to Chris Darling, our Board Secretary.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's just a comment. I really welcome this audit, partly because I think it links back to some of the challenge we've had previously from Ruth around learning. How do we learn from audit action? So not that this is one, and the only way to learn, but what we have started doing is trying to take themes from the recommendations, and we've been working with Simon and his team, the analytical resource they have, to try and understand how we take the learning. So yeah, I think it was helpful in the context of what we're trying to do around learning from audit actions as well.
Thank you, Chris. That's really positive. I'm going to turn now to Julie Ash, Corporate Services. Julie.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Julie Ash, Head of Corporate Services. Just wanted to echo really the comments from Claire and Chris in that we found this report really helpful. So we are revising the format somewhat in line with some of the recommendations to hopefully make it a little clearer and be a bit more focused on prioritisation, etc. So just wanted to say thank you, and yes, we welcome the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. We note that. And finally, I can see Paul Evans' hand. Paul.
Thank you, Chair. Paul Evans, Interim Head of Quality Assurance and Regulatory Compliance. Just to follow up on Claire's point, our own internal audit schedule has got an audit scheduled in during November around outstanding audit actions. So we are actually in the process of picking up that audit of an audit up.
Thank you, Paul, for that clarity. And it is pleasing indeed to see two reasonable assurances there on two objectives and two substantial assurances also. So unless there are any other questions, I will now turn to Simon, who can present the decarbonisation review report. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Just by way of a brief introduction, and we are looking now at pages 145 to 162 of the agenda pack. The committee will be aware of the enormous agenda around decarbonisation and the move to carbon neutral and the incredibly ambitious targets that have been set for 2030, and also the work that colleagues in Audit Wales have produced recently around this and the calls to action that are included within their work. We had planned this year to look at progress on decarbonisation at 11 of the 13 NHS Wales organisations, including shared services, who of course will play a significant part in this around the procurement agenda, which is going to be hugely significant for all organisations. And we plan to look at how organisations were responding in terms of governance, in terms of a localised strategy, including costings, how they were monitoring and reporting, and also in terms of project delivery. And we've undertaken the fieldwork around this at 5 organisations, but came to the view as we were working through this that notwithstanding the scope of the work, it was still quite early to be able to do meaningful testing around a lot of the monitoring and reporting and delivery at this stage. So what we've done, Chair, is to, on the basis of undertaking the audit at 5 organisations, but also reviewing the strategies and other documentation at all organisations, is to effectively pause our fieldwork for the moment and return to the audits either later this year or early next year, depending on where progress has been made, but to produce a summary report of all of the, if you like, the issues and observations that have arisen so far. So we've done that in terms for all organisations in terms of the 11 summary actions. But where we had undertaken the fieldwork, and DHCW was one, we've also raised some specific findings, which you can see in the separate second appendix. And there are 8 specific actions there, and DHCW have provided management responses and timelines in the normal way to those. So we've taken a consistent approach across NHS Wales, because we felt if we carried on to conclusion, we would probably have to limit our scope so much that it would in one sense make an assurance opinion fairly meaningless at this point. So as I say, we've taken the decision to pause that, but to produce this summary report, and we'll return formally to follow up around things like costings, the monitoring, reporting, project delivery, as that becomes more relevant and more commonplace going forward. So as I say, we've identified 11 all Wales actions, and pleased to see that there's quite a number of those that DHCW had already made progress on, and we've raised 8 specific recommendations based on the fieldwork for DHCW to consider. And as I say, we have management responses there, and we'll continue that dialogue with Audit Wales as well, because no doubt it will form part of their ongoing programmes as well, following up from the work that they've just reported. So, Chair, that's all I wanted to say in terms of that, but very happy to take any questions or observations. And I can see Alistair's hand is up already.
Thank you, Simon. Yes, that's a very helpful resume and a very helpful approach. Alistair, we'll take your question first, then, if I may. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Simon, for the report. This is clearly extremely challenging for all bodies within public bodies within Wales, and indeed for private organisations too. The reference point is 2018-19 as a base, and the target data. I mean, I'm assuming that we talk about this not so much as a target date, but a requirement is to reduce by 34% 2030. And the part that I don't feel wholly assured about is, first of all, the clear sense that you're realistically projecting, which is that there has been a limited amount of progress that seems to be right across the NHS within Wales, and we've also had a limited resource capacity to be able to monitor the progress that we're making. We are now 7 years away effectively from that date. And the part that I feel less assured about is, does the organization actually have a plan to join up where we are now with the requirement for 2030? Because obviously the more that the years tick by, the more problematic, the more challenging it becomes to ultimately make the steps that we take. And I just wondered if Simon might be able to comment on that.
Well, I think you raised. Thank you, Marianne. I think,
Simon, if you come in first, and then perhaps I can turn to Julie Ash to respond more formally then on behalf of DHCW on that specific question. Simon.
In which case, then I will happily leave Julie in terms of the specifics with DHCW. But Alistair, those points are key. We are only 7 years away, and it's an incredibly ambitious target. And one of the key factors is going to be whether the resource is there, both in terms of capital investment from Welsh Government to support that. I've seen one health board's costed programme, and that is way in excess of £100 million. Well, if that's replicated across the NHS and then the wider public sector, we can begin to get a picture of the potential resource, notwithstanding that can clearly be integrated with other work in some cases, and it's also finding the resource in terms of the skill capacity to support that as well. So I think we are at a very difficult point, and I think Audit Wales's challenges recognise that in terms of their latest publications, and I think there's an element, Alistair, of having to wait and see what will come forward, because there clearly needs to be a massive investment and support if organisations are going to meet these ambitious targets.
Thank you, Simon. I'll turn to Julie then about Alistair's specific question about DHCW's plan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, we do have a roadmap, Alistair. I'd be happy to bring back further detail to a future meeting. I agree it's challenging, and I would concur with Simon's comments that, I think it's a bit look at how we get on. But we have got various steps laid out along the line, such as, we've moved to renewable energy contracts. We're looking at our estates, we're looking at our energy consumption, this sort of thing. But I do appreciate there's a lot of detail in there, and that for the committee to perhaps, be assured a little more, I need to perhaps drill down a little bit more into that in future reporting. So I'd be happy to do that if that's helpful.
Thank you, Julie, and I'm sure there'll be an opportunity for you to take some of this offline as well to give Alistair that more detailed assurance. Diolch, Julie. Claire.
So decarbonisation is something close to my heart, but it's also something I'm responsible for under the Mission 5 of our DHCW strategy, and I lead. I think there's a couple of things for me. One is, and we'll probably come on to it later, is the Welsh Audit Office 5-point action plan. I think that's really helpful to demystify what we need to do in order to deliver this across the organisation. And for us at DHCW, there's 3 key areas, I think. One of that is about procurement and really getting underneath how we calculate the CO2 footprint of our procurement and really look at the full scope in terms of the source and ultimately our impact on that particular area. And I think it's true to say we're finding it challenging. This is an area of real opportunity to get those numbers right. So we're working alongside shared services to really understand those numbers so that we can really prioritise what we do in terms of approach. The other key areas for us is the estates and where we work and our physical footprint. And I know Julie and the team are doing quite some work in understanding that, but equally reducing that through the investment in lighting, for example, to really try and minimise that impact. But the key thing for us, I think, is around the data centres and the impact of moving to cloud and what that will impact on our CO2 footprint, together with our hardware. And as we shift from a less capital, more revenue intensive organisation, how do we use our equipment in a way that really minimises replacement and maximises life? So I think there is a lot of work to do. I am really pleased with the progress we've made. We have a clear understanding of our CO2 footprint, the biggest impact of which is procurement at the moment. But I think we've still got a lot of work to do to really get underneath that and understand the priority within that. And again, going forward, the 2030 is a key deadline, and we will aim to achieve that and actually try and to achieve that before the date if the numbers are right. But that means a change in behaviour for everyone in DHCW. So the important thing for me is that non-tangible stuff, which is really about the language we use and how we bring the CO2 implications into our everyday decision making. And I think again, that's an area that we all have a responsibility to raise the profile and ensure all our decisions have that consideration going forward. So I think as Simon has shown in the report, we've still got some way to go. And we're willing to learn from others. So it'd be good to nick the health board that has done that really granulated plan, Simon. But equally, I think as the feedback from Welsh Government would suggest, that we have made significant progress in our first year in trying to formulate that plan.
Yeah, Claire, that's a really helpful summary of your observations and feedback. I can see Julie's hand up again. Julie, is that?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. It was just one final one linked to Claire's comments on procurement. Just to note that we have now been invited to sit on the Welsh Government procurement work stream. So that should be helpful, and we can continue to work with shared services with a view to developing some low carbon ICT procurement strategies.
Yeah, Julie, that's helpful, and no doubt we will be coming back to this subject later on in the agenda with the decarbonisation states and compliance report, of course. So for the time being, can I thank Simon and thank Stephen Cheney for presenting those two reports, which we note for assurance, and we also note the internal audit plan which Simon presented previously. I don't think there are any other contributions, so we shall move on then to agenda item 4.3, the Audit Wales Committee update, and their pages 167 to 183. And I'll now invite Darren Griffiths, Audit Manager at Audit Wales, to present the update, and it includes the WCCIS follow-up report, which I mentioned previously. And here to respond to any specific questions are Lee Mullin, the WCCI's Programme Director, and Seth Newman from Audit Wales. Diolch yn fawr. Darren?
Hi, Marion. Sorry, it's Nathan. It is today. Darren's unable to make the meeting. Right. It's okay, no problem. Good morning. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So yeah, we've just got the audit committee update to present today. So I'll just quickly take you through the main points from that. You'll notice that our financial audit colleagues are not present in the meeting today. That's basically because the position hasn't changed in terms of our accounts work since what we last reported in July, with no new work completed since then. We have completed our review of the ICT environment and application controls that are applied to the national financial systems hosted by DHCW, and we'll report those findings to the committee in February 2023. In terms of our performance audit work, the field work phase for our structured assessment review has concluded, and so that's my job now, is to sort of just draft the report in the next couple of weeks, and that will be formally presented to a committee in February 2023. Just want to say thanks to Chris and Laura for the way they've organised the work, because the field work phase went really well as part of the review. In terms of our plan work that's not started yet, there's been a recent development in relation to our locally focused work, which will focus on the governance and budget arrangements within digital primary care services within DHCW. And we're currently scoping this particular piece of work, and we'll update the committee as the review progresses. In terms of our All Wales thematic on workforce planning arrangements, we're still scoping that particular piece of work and expect to issue the project brief later this month. There's been no good practice exchange events since we last reported to the committee in July. And in terms of our national studies, got three items to talk about there. So we got the CCIS review. So the Auditor General wrote to the Chair of the Public Accounts and Public Administration Committee on the 1st of July 2022 to provide an update. That update outlines the main actions taken so far in response to our recommendations and progress more generally against the key issues raised in our previous report on WCCIS. And the key messages for that are in Appendix 1 of the update. We've already mentioned our report on the public sector readiness for net zero carbon by 2030. So we've published 2 reports for that review. The key findings report, which sets out an overall conclusion and 5 calls for action. And whilst the calls for action are not strictly recommendations, we are encouraging public bodies to consider the report and through their internal governance structures set out publicly how they intend to respond to the calls of action. So that might be something that we might want to consider for Audit and Assurance Committee, perhaps early in 2023. And the evidence report is, it supplements the key findings report by providing more detailed findings and data. In terms of the final review is on equality impact assessment. So we also recently published that national report. The review looked at the overall approach to undertaking equality impact assessments in public bodies in Wales. We did not evaluate the individual public body approaches in detail. But our findings highlight examples of good practice and aspects of the equality assessment process across the bodies that we looked at. But there were also several areas of improvement which are summarised in our update. Our report makes several recommendations for Welsh Government, but there is also one directed to public bodies around the need to review their approach to quality impact assessments, considering the findings from within the report and detailed guidance available on the Equality and Human Rights Commission and Practice Hub. And that's it from me. So if there's any questions, happy to take them. Alistair?
Alistair, thank you, Nathan, for that. Let me kickstart then with a question from Alistair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Nathan, for very clear presentation and clear report. I'm just interested in specifically on Exhibit 4, the scoping of the workforce risks and examining those, and wondering, will that work be not only scoped, but the actual work be conducted such that it can inform budget setting for DHCW for the next financial year?
Yeah, we're hoping to carry that, sort of get that work underway as soon as possible. So we'll be issuing a brief this month with a bit of luck, and then field work with field work will follow shortly after. So yeah, that could well feed into your budget setting process for next year. Yes.
Yeah, Nathan, thank you, Alistair. Ruth?
You'll be unsurprised my questions around WCCIS.
I anticipated them, Ruth.
So I mean, I could just say that and then let it go.
You'll see that I got Seth Newman, who's my colleague from Audit Wales, who was directly involved with the review. He's in the meeting, so if I can answer the question, I'll hand over to Seth if that's okay.
Great. I mean, I think really it was a question around progress since the last review, because obviously it feels to me like we're in a better place, and I know Lee will comment as well in terms of knowing what the issues are, because your review reflected the strategic review that we did in most aspects, and so you'd expect to see a plan in place for that. But I just wondered what your sense was in terms of progress, or are we still at the planning it stage? Because there's lots going on.
Yeah.
But realistically have we moved forward since last time?
I mean, I'll let Seth sort of answer the question in a bit more detail. My vibe is that there has been some progress made, but there's still a long way to go. Seth?
Thank you, Nathan. So Seth?
Yeah, thank you, Marion. Well, I suppose what I would say would be the update letter contains all the progress that's happened since we last did our full review, which was back in October 2020. So that contains the details of what progress has been made. as you mentioned, the update that we did kind of reflected a lot of the issues that have been highlighted in the strategic review. Just to note, though, that update letter was back in July now that we published that. So I don't know if Lee wants to come in terms of updates on what's been happening in terms of progress more recently, because obviously a few months have elapsed since then. So there may be some stuff in that letter that's now a little bit out of date.
Diolch, Seth. You're right, 3 months have passed probably since that last letter. Lee, are you in a position to update on progress since that letter was issued in July?
Yeah, yes, happy to. So when Seth was here, it was on the back of a very challenging time of a period of bad platform performance. That was addressed back in February, and since then we've seen relatively stable performance from the platform. That was a huge distraction from the team, and prevented them taking forwards a number of items. So the good news is, yeah, the strategic review in its kind of first phase laid out a number of challenges and a number of areas that needed to be addressed. We have now initiated a second phase of that strategic review. Channel 3 have returned to work with us for the next 3 months to deliver the plan, the revised business case, and the kind of forward-looking strategy of what we need to do for the platform for the coming years. And the good news is performance has been relatively stable since then. We've had a few minor outages, but nothing in line with the periods that we had. So that distraction has largely been resolved. And other kind of positive moves are we have onboarded AB UHB and a pilot team from BC UHB in this period as well. So hopefully demonstrating some good progress. In terms of baselining, I think we still need to really baseline the program and produce that kind of reset set of documents that we will again look to our friends in Welsh Audit to kind of review and demonstrate that we are creating the artifacts that they wanted to see from a perspective of planning and program kind of forward strategy.
Thank you very much, Lee, for those comments. And it's positive to hear that the performance more recently has been relatively stable and that there has indeed been significant progress in this area. So thank you for that. And it's clearly an important programme going forward and is of interest across Wales to each health board and each local authority. So no doubt we will be coming back to this in due course again, but thank you for those updates. I can't see any other hands up, so I presume there aren't any further questions to Nathan. So if not, then the committee notes the Audit Wales Committee update for assurance, and I'd like to thank Nathan in particular for the clarity of his presentation, and to Seth and also Lee for joining us to feed into our discussion. Diolch yn fawr iawn. So let's turn then now to agenda item 4.4, which is the baseline governance review action plan report. We heard reference from Nathan to the structured assessment, which is underway. And you'll recall that the baseline governance review was undertaken last year as a preliminary review in advance of the more formal usual structured assessment. We're now looking at pages 184 to 192. So it's my pleasure now to invite our Board Secretary, Chris Darling, to present this action plan report. Diolch, Chris.
Diolch, Chair. I'm just going to run through the report quickly, highlighting some of the key areas since the last meeting. So as you say, Marion, DHCW in our first year of operation agreed that we would have a baseline governance review undertaken, which would be followed by a formal structured assessment. So the thinking was very much that the baseline governance review would be to aid organisational learning, as we were very much in our embryonic stages. But nonetheless, the review still looked to assess whether DHCW was making good progress in putting in place support for good governance, efficient, effective and economic ethical use of our resources. And probably just worth noting, no formal recommendations were made as part of the baseline governance review in the spirit of organisational learning. What were put forward, though, were a number of opportunities for improvement to consider from an organisational perspective, which we've since done. Through discussions at this committee, we agreed that we would turn those opportunities for improvement into a bit of an action plan so we could track through how we were progressing those over the course of the year. So we first presented those back in April, the opportunities for improvement at the audit committee. So within the packs, Appendix A sets out the opportunities for improvement and where we've got to. As I say, they're not formal recommendations, but we have scored them to try and kind of give an indication of where we've moved things forward. So since the last committee meeting, a couple of areas have been completed that have helped inform our thinking moving forward. One was around how we ensure board engagement into some of DHCW's core activities, and there was a pilot engagement session with the service desk that was held with one of our independent members and our chair at the end of July that's helped inform thinking moving forward. Another area that has been moved forward since the last committee meeting was around our organisational performance report. And I know Michelle and the team have been working on this on an ongoing basis really since we established, but certainly a slight change in approach was presented to the September board meeting, reflecting some of the changes based on some of the opportunities for improvement. And the areas where we know there are still a few, a bit of work to do, which the head of engagement post, I think, has now started in post this week, I believe, and we are interviewing for a head of comms post towards the end of this month. So those were the two areas that we still have a bit of work to do on. By the next committee meeting, we should have our structured assessment being reported. I'm hopeful that we'd have completed, the areas for opportunities, for improvement from the baseline governance review, and we can therefore then start to focus on the formal recommendations that Audit Wales put forward as part of that process. Happy to take any questions on that, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that update. Ruth.
Diolch, Chair, and thanks, Chris. I just wanted to say thank you really for the baseline governance review to Audit Wales. And for Marilyn and Alistair, it's an incredibly useful piece of information. It's enabled board members to ask questions of the exec. As Michelle well knows, every single time we speak about procurement, I yak on about single tenders and our use of single tenders, and that was directly as a result of something that came out of our baseline governance review. So it's been a really helpful document for me, particularly over the last year. So the work that went into it was well worth it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth, and I'm sure the whole committee would echo your observations in that respect. Diolch.
Yeah,
Alistair, sorry, you want to come back in?
I'm just going to say thanks, Ruth, and I'll feed it back to the team.
Great, thank you. Alistair, your hand is up.
Thank you, Chair Diolch, and also Ruth, thanks for that context. I also found it very, very helpful. I was just wondering if, I don't know, Chris, if you're able to clarify, but just the understanding of the role of head of engagement, that post, is that an external stakeholder engagement kind of post within the NHS, or does it actually have a broader remit than that, if you happen to know that?
Yeah, so it's an internal post within DHCW that will work in it very closely with our wider external stakeholders. Michelle, they will report directly through Michelle's area, so I'll leave Michelle to give any extra detail, if that's okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Alistair. We developed an external stakeholder engagement strategy actually toward the early part of this year. So appreciate you may not have had the opportunity.
We seem to be losing Michelle, or certainly I am. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's frozen for I think probably all of us, Marianne.
Yes. Okay. Well, as
Mary,
you
do you want me
heard,
to just
yes,
pick
could
up?
you
I
just
think
recap? Yeah.
I
please
think what
do.
Michelle was going to say was we approved as a board, Alistair, a stakeholder engagement strategy in November 2021, and an associated stakeholder engagement plan was approved by the board in January 2022. I think this post is very much there to drive that stakeholder engagement strategy and the plan itself. So happy to share those, because I appreciate that, was before your time, but very much in keeping with how we engage with external stakeholders.
Thank you, Chair. If I could also, Chris, thank you for that. It would probably be just very helpful if I were able to have the contact who has been appointed, so that if it were all right, that I might be able to just make direct contact and just ask a question or two in a supportive way, but just to try and understand who what the breadth of external stakeholders. Michelle, sorry, you were right in the middle of the most fantastic bit of prose, but you froze. Your prose froze.
I do apologise. Actually, my laptop dropped out. It's trying to restart in the middle of audit committee, which is very frustrating. I do apologise. That was very unhelpful. I think Chris picked up there. Very happy to make the contact. A lady called Nadine Payne, who started with us this week. She's actually come to us from Cardiff University, where she was their lead on strategic partnerships through the university and commercial partners. So I've got high hopes for Nadine. As I think Chris was filling in there, the initial plan, if you like, is built upon how we engage with our key strategic partners. I'm also anticipating Nadine will be looking at our partnerships with universities and other potential kind of academic partnerships, as well as partnerships with industry. So it's quite ambitious. Really happy to arrange for her to meet with you, Alistair, and with other members of the board. I think that would be key because colleagues have already provided quite a lot of input to the original thinking around the stakeholder engagement. And what I've asked is that Nadine, talks to that, looks at the strategy, looks at the plan, and does a bit of a refresh on the plan. So it's probably very timely, actually. And then we will bring that back to the board with a bit of an update on where we've got to in the last 6 months, but also the thinking on how we want to take that forward. So really happy to engage on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And I'm sure we all look forward to engaging with Nadine in her new role. It's a crucial role for us going forward in terms of engaging specifically with our strategic partners. But I'm sure it will be very helpful to see the refresh of that engagement strategy, which we approved last year. So thank you, Chris, for presenting that action plan report. We note the report and note the 2 additional actions completed since our last meeting, which is pleasing to see. Diolch yn fawr. So let's move on then to agenda item 4.5, which is the audit action log. And I'll now turn to Julie Ash to update the committee on the current status of the action log. And if you could please note any changes in the status of the action since our last meeting. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Chair. So we're now on page 190. So the log contains details of all open audit recommendations. So at the last meeting, we actually reviewed quite a high number for 39 actions, but we were able to close 29, which left a total of 10 actions open. We received 2 reports at the last meeting, which contained a total of 11 new actions. Those reports were in the areas of workforce and also a directorate review. So the current status, we have 11 actions marked as green, complete, 9 as yellow, which indicates they're on target for completion by the agreed date. But we do have 1 that's amber at the time of writing this report. That was an action that was due to be completed by the end of September and was running late. So we would like to request an extension we'd suggest 6 months on that one, although we anticipate it being closed out earlier than that. So in the cover sheets, I've actually listed, I won't go through them all because I'm sure everybody's had the opportunity to read them. I've listed those that are complete. I've also listed the one we're requesting an extension for, which is a software development action. And I've just noted that the 9 are on target for completion by their due date. And then there's obviously the log is included in the papers for people to see the detail. That's all I really wanted to say on that, Chair. So, yeah.
Thank you, Julie. That's very clear. Thank you for updating us. Alistair, you have a question.
It's more, thank you, Chair. It's more just of a comment rather than a question. It's just to say, you know, really well done, because it's usually the sign of a well-run organisation that outstanding audit actions are completed and completed on time. And you know, I certainly appreciate that, and the prioritisation and work that goes into it. And I recognise that not everything is you know, green, but that would be a perfect world. So just to say, you know, thank you.
Thank you very much, Alistair. It's appreciated.
Thank you, Alistair, for those comments. And I'm sure we would all echo actually how pleasing it is to see such excellent progress with a total of those 11 actions now closed. So thank you very much, Julie, for driving the closure of these actions and for presenting the report in such a clear way. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Chair.
We note the status of the tracker. I'm looking at my watch here, and we're making good time. It's 10 o'clock, just slightly ahead of schedule. So we'll move swiftly on then to the local counter fraud update report, which is agenda item 4.6. And I will now invite our head of counter fraud at Cardiff and Vale Counter Fraud Services to present the counter fraud update report for DHCW. Gareth.
Thank you, Chair. Very kind. I'll be as brief as I can. You've all had the report. I think probably had a chance to read it. It's not overly long, so quite an easy read as well, I think. Essentially, we're up to 49 days of counter fraud work for the organisation. Overall, we plan to do 40 for the year. The reason for the high uptake of days thus far has been because we have had one live investigation, which remains live, which has taken up a fair number of the days. That's not to say that we will therefore do no further work for the rest of the year. It's just one of those things, and you're going to get more days than you should this year, I guess. So that's positive, really. With regards to staffing, we are one staff member down at the moment. We lost one to the Counter Fraud Service Wales back at the start of September, which was a good move for them, and obviously negatively impacts us. But we have been out to advert. That closed at midnight last night, and we've had 18 applications, and we're trying to narrow it down to sort of 6 shortlistable people to interview, and hope to have someone in place by at the latest January, depending on notice periods. With regards to infrastructure, you'll see that we continue to work on our activity database. I haven't had a chance to review the counter fraud, bribery and corruption policy as yet due to other priorities. The digital presence is now in place. E-learning arrangements are still on hold because we're still waiting for the actual package to be delivered from Counter Fraud Service Wales. I think I have an inkling, and I'm not absolutely sure about this, but DHCW will be piloting that. I have a feeling. I will check on that. We've developed and designed. We've done some old school sort of work in developing and designing some posters, etc., with regards to getting awareness out there to staff. We're obviously only in a position at the moment to sort of put those up in the Cardiff office rather than sort of drive around the country to other places, but we will try and find some methods of sending them to the local, the peripheral DHCW sort of buildings to get those put up. During the reporting period, we've had 2 fraud prevention notices issued by the Counter Fraud Authority, which we've acted upon, and they were in relation to cyber-enabled mandate fraud, so they were quite pertinent to DHCW. So via your cyber security team, we did a very brief investigation to find that there were no issues with regards to the rogue suppliers concerned in the FPN notices, either to DHCW or to any other organisations throughout NHS Wales. We've completed now 3 general counter fraud awareness sessions for DHCW staff, and we'll be making further efforts to carry out further ones in the near future. And I believe we've got a presence now on some of the 10 talks upcoming within the organisation. We've produced 1 newsletter. We should have produced 2, but we've only done 1. We've held back on 1 because it's International Fraud Awareness Week coming up, so we're going to try and tie it in with that. And the only other thing to report upon is the live investigation. That's an investigation in relation to theft of IT equipment. There is a brief précis of what that investigation involves within the report. It continues to be a live investigation. There are some ongoing issues with it, and obviously I can delve deeper into that during the private session that I think is scheduled after this meeting, but I wouldn't wish to sort of delve any deeper in this meeting. So that's about it really from the counter fraud perspective, but happy to answer any questions anybody has in relation to any of that or anything else.
Diolch yn fawr, Gareth. That's helpful, and as you say, we'll be coming back to that investigation in our private session at the end of our public committee meeting this morning. Claire.
Just wanted to thank Gareth and his team who've worked quite closely with us over the last couple of months in relation to the investigation, but equally to note the support we've had from Simon and the internal audit team. We've worked quite hard collectively, I think, over the last couple of months, and I'd like to formally thank them for their support.
Diolch yn fawr, Claire, and I'm sure we would all echo that. It's good to hear of that support across the board, and thanks particularly to Gareth. Ruth, and then we'll turn to Alistair.
Thanks, Gareth, for that summary, and obviously we'll discuss the specific DHCW case later, and that's right that should be held in private. I mean, I think it just goes to show that we're not immune to instances of fraud as DHCW, and I don't know whether you can answer this yet, Gareth, but given the cost of living pressures on people currently, are you yet seeing more instances of fraud, or particularly in the areas perhaps of overpayment and people not coming forward with that, as people start to get personally affected by rising bills and things? I think it's something that we need to be very conscious of at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, there's been raised in various other audit committees that I sit upon that very point. I wouldn't say we've seen an upscaling in any reported or referred fraud to us at this point in time. And with regards to the point about overpayments, that's quite a difficult one to measure, in as much as they were sky high during the COVID pandemic because of the way that people were recruited and then managed, because there was a need to get people or onboard people very, very quickly in large numbers. So I think what you will probably find with overpayments is you'll see a downturn in those. Whether you'd have to look back prior to COVID really to see if there is actually a realistic upturn, if that makes sense to you. It's so that's quite a difficult one to measure. But that's
quite interesting actually, because I'd imagine that's probably one of the more common issues that we come across, isn't it? In terms of kind of day to day, how quickly do people come back to us and say, oh, I'm really sorry, you've paid me a month too much, and what does that tail look like? I think it's
yeah, there's quite a rigid policy in relation to overpayments, and to be honest, I'm not aware of it being an issue within DHCW as such. I know it's very much a hot potato across a couple of bigger health boards at the moment, because there have been some huge losses during COVID, and I'm actually sitting on a for want of a better word, a steering group, I guess, or with regards to trying to sort of solve that problem at the moment within the Cardiff and Vale setting. So obviously, if anything, or when things come out of that, they'll be fed across all organisations. But yeah, going back to your original question, really, no, we haven't seen a sort of upscaling in anything at this point in time, but we are mindful of it, yes.
Thank you, Ruth, for raising that, and thank you, Gareth, for your response. If you just bear with me, I just can see Mark Cox's hand up, and I just wonder whether your point was directly related to anything you've just heard, Mark, or was it a separate point you wanted to make?
No, Marion, thank you, Chair. It was just a response to Ruth's comments, really, and it's bang on a topic I was going to raise as part of the verbal update in terms of losses and the review that's currently underway in terms of salary overpayments. I think what Gareth's referring to is that during COVID, there were a lot of staff obviously brought online quite quickly, and the new starters came and went, really, and there was a lot of overpayments, I think, as a consequence of that, Gareth. Ours is slightly different. What we're seeing is slight overpayments due to maybe managers not recording on ESR quickly enough. Generally, the recovery is very quick, but as part of my update, I was just going to mention that at mid-year we generally do a review, and it'll be part of the losses update if there were any going forward.
Diolch, Mark. Thank you for that. So I will turn finally for the last question then to Alistair.
Thank you, Chair. And again, Gareth, thank you for the detail and some of this, the description. I just wondered, Gareth, if you could provide a view on whether we have a sufficiently well established whistleblowing policy, and is it frequently reviewed? Is it shared adequately amongst staff, such that we can be alert to and staff can be alert to the potential instances of fraud, rare as they are?
Yeah, we've obviously got the counter fraud, bribery and corruption policy, which I alluded to earlier in that, which I think is up for review shortly, which covers sort of whistleblowing, or for want of a better word, people coming to us confidentially. I believe there is the whistleblowing policy through Audit Wales as well, that people, which is quite a stringent policy as far as I'm aware. With regards to getting people to engage with us, that's obviously quite a big aspect of our role, really, especially with organisations that we don't sit within, but we provide a service to externally from an external source, I guess. Yeah, that's why we try to get as many sort of awareness sessions in as we can. And for example, that poster campaign that we've been undertaking, etc. So yeah, I'm quite happy that there's quite a robust sort of system in place for people to come to us and to feel that they're supported, and that they'll be treated with anonymity or confidentiality should they be required to. There's plenty of sort of written material out there for that, and resources for them to sort of come to us, and routes to come to us. We'd always encourage more, but yeah, I'm quite confident at the moment with that.
Thank you very much, Gareth. I'm going to turn to Chris Darling, who is our exec lead on whistleblowing, and as it happens, I am the independent member champion for whistleblowing. It would be helpful, I think, for the committee, for a new member specifically, Chris, if you could just highlight what we have in place.
Yeah, so whistleblowing, Alistair, or staff raising concerns, as it'll also be referred to as, is a national, so all Wales policy. We're working at the moment on some targeted comms for DHCW, particularly in light of the cost of living crisis, but also generally. So we've got a slot planned on our 10 Talk, our podcast for staff, on whistleblowing and a number of other mechanisms. But in terms of process, it's similar across NHS Wales bodies, but the comms we're doing is more targeted.
Diolch yn fawr, Chris. Thank you, and thank you again, Gareth, for your presentation. Can I just ask one final question? You mentioned that we're down on staffing, with a potential likelihood that we'll have a new appointment in place by early January. That probably indicates that we're losing some staff effort, and I just wonder how that might affect the effort that you were able to provide DHCW in the interim.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously lose days across the board. I mean, I don't think it will impact that heavily. I mean, we've got a lot of things in the diary already, and we'll maintain those. I mean, they're only going to drop out of the way if anything comes in that really requires a very timely response. So there's, like, for example, the investigation that took place with DHCW required a timely response with things like going out and carrying out arrests, etc., in order to secure evidence, in which case we did have to put aside a few things for other organizations. So there's always those sort of prioritizing things. But with regards to things that are diarized, etc., and if, for example, anything else comes up with DHCW, I like to think that we're still sort of resilient enough to sort of respond to those things. So I don't think it'll have a major impact. And ultimately, at the end of the year, I hope that we will have provided above and beyond what we were aiming to do, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Gareth, and thank you for attending and engaging with us today. So we note the counterfraud update relating to the work carried out in the second part of this financial year. So that brings us nicely to very close to 10:15. We're now going to take a comfort break, and we'll come back at 10:30 then to resume the second half of our committee agenda. Diolch yn fawr, go and have a paned and stretch your legs, and we'll see you back here in 15 minutes or so. Diolch yn fawr. Hope you enjoyed that break and you've come back feeling refreshed and ready to engage. So welcome back, and we'll move on now to parts 5 and 6 of the Audit Committee meeting. And as you'll have seen from your papers, this part of the agenda will now focus predominantly on governance activity, with a number of important reports being presented by directors from DHCW. And we shall open this part of the agenda then with the Public Accounts and Public Administration Committee, which is the Health and Safety Committee review into DHCW, which takes place with a formal hearing later this month. So we are looking at pages 217 to 240, and I will now invite Chris, our Board Secretary, to present the report which we're being asked to receive and discuss. Diolch, Chris.
Diolch, Chair. So on the 15th of July, the Health and Social Care and Public Administration and Public Accounts Committees announced a joint consultation review into DHCW. So there was a slight surprise. We knew that a review was planned. We didn't realise it would come quite this quickly, and we weren't 100% clear until we saw the terms of reference whether the review was into DHCW specifically or more broadly into digital health and care across the system. The review has published a set of terms of reference which has clarified that they're set out in section 3 of the cover paper, and as part of the consultation process, the committees have asked both ourselves, DHCW, and a number of wider partner organisation to comment on the terms of reference. So we submitted our written submission on the 23rd of September, which was the deadline for written feedback. That's included within the papers for today's committee meeting. As you alluded to, Marion, the oral hearing will take place on the 26th of October, so next week. Helen Thomas, Chief Executive, Rydian Hurl, Medical Director, Claire, who's with us today, our Exec Director of Finance and Deputy CEO, and Simon Jones, the Chair of DHCW, will attend in person. It will be a hybrid session. It will be chaired by Russell George, who is the Chair of the Health and Social Care Committee. The final point I would note, Chair, is just it's quite unusual to have a joint committee, but it's to make best use of committee members' time. An hour and a half is set aside for the verbal session from 9:30 to 11 on the 26th of October. And colleagues and stakeholders will be able to view that live via the Senedd TV, via their live stream link, which we will share beforehand.
Diolch yn fawr, Chris. That's a really helpful update, and the papers you've attached there are very clear and concise. And I think it's really helpful to have on record, actually, clarity around our roles and responsibilities as DHCW, because as we know, there is sometimes a lack of clarity around some of those areas. So particularly helpful in advance of the oral hearing, I think that they're put formally on record there. You will have seen the paperwork, colleague. Are there any observations, any questions you want to raise with Chris? No? Claire, is there anything you'd like to add? I'm aware also there will be written submissions, and when will we be in a position to see those? Are they going to be publicly made available? What's the position, Chris?
Yeah, they were published yesterday, so I will be sharing those with everyone here. They are on the committee's website now as of late yesterday.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful, and I'm sure it will make some very useful reading for us. So if there aren't any questions to Chris on that, on behalf of the committee, I'd just like to wish both Claire and Chris well as they prepare for that hearing along with our respective colleagues. And I can see just finally, Alistair, you put up your hand. You have a question on this subject?
Thank you, Marion. And just a quick one, if I may, Chris. Do we know when the Joint Committee will be reporting on their review?
We haven't had any clarity in terms of timeframes reporting back following the oral session, Alistair. No, we haven't had that clarity yet.
Thank you, and no doubt
Thank you.
that will come in due course. So thank you, Chris, for updating us, and we wish you well for that oral hearing on the 26th of October. So we've received that report, and we'll move on now then to agenda item 5.2, which deals specifically with risk management and board assurance. You'll recall in this committee we were keen to include within the agenda some deep dives into specific areas of challenges and risk. And during the course of this morning, we're going to be looking specifically at our financial risks, which will be presented by our Executive Director of Finance and Deputy Chief Executive, Claire Osmondson-Little. But I'm going to invite Chris Darling first to present an update on the risk management and board assurance report, and note as a committee the status of the risk register and the 18-month corporate risk trend analysis. Chris.
Thank you, Marion. So within the papers, there's a number of items. There's the risk management cover report accompanied by the corporate risk register. There's also a presentation around the 18 months analysis, which I'm going to start with, if that's okay. I'll then quickly run through the cover paper, and we'll finish leaving as much time as possible for the presentation deep dive onto the financial risks. I know that's something the committee were keen to do, and we've made sure we've got time allocated. So if it's okay, I'm going to run through the presentation to start with, and then take any questions on this before we move on to the deep dive. So just to provide a little bit of context, we were established 18 months ago on the 1st of April 2021. At our second board meeting, approval was given for our risk and board assurance framework strategy at the end of May. As part of that strategy, we agreed a committee assignment approach to corporate risks. So all corporate risks added to the corporate risk register are done so with the approval of the relevant executive lead, and they are then assigned to a committee of the board. In addition to that, risks are reviewed on a monthly basis via our management board, where we get into a bit of detail and discussion around our corporate risks and some of our directorate risks. So what I'm going to present today is for the period for our first 18-month period, just some of the movement within the corporate risk register. So deep dives have taken place over that time period by the committees, both this and the Digital Governance and Safety Committee. And as part of the work plan, we've agreed to do this 18 months analysis and then do an analysis on an annual basis to make sure the corporate risk register remains dynamic as possible. So just to highlight some of the changes, when we established, there were 14 risks on the corporate risk register on the 1st of April. And between April the 1st and the 30th of September, there's been 52 individual risks managed on the corporate risk register. 7 of these risks have been active for that 18-month period of time. So we've seen 38 new risks that have been escalated in addition to those 14 initial risks that we had corporately from the 1st of April. 26 risks have been removed since our establishment. So half of our risks that we've seen during that period have been closed or de-escalated. In terms of the risks that have remained on the risk register since our establishment, they're set out on this slide. 2 of them relate to the relate to the Audit and Assurance Committee assigned risks. The remaining risks relate to the Digital Governance and Safety Committee. The next Digital Governance and Safety Committee on the 3rd of November will be doing a deep dive on these risks that haven't moved. A number of them, worth noting, have had deep dives, but I think it's right to go back to them given they haven't moved. The 2 from an audit and assurance perspective, so Welsh language compliance, we've had some discussions on this and plan to de-escalate this risk and replace it with a number of more bespoke specific risks, one particularly around recruitment, including assessing posts and translating job descriptions. There's 2 other further areas from a Welsh language perspective that we want to focus in on, one around translation for major projects such as DSPP, and the other one is Welsh language provision on the service desk. In terms of the second Audit and Assurance Committee assigned risk, staff vacancies, we had a deep dive into this risk at this committee earlier this year. There's a lot of activity that has taken place to mitigate this risk. So my recommendation would be, if it remains a corporate risk, by the next committee meeting, we revisit that and have another deep dive into that risk. So the diagrams here on the left show our current corporate risk register as of the end of September, the 23 risks broken down by critical and significant. And on the right, just highlighting what I mentioned earlier around those that have been escalated and removed during the period of time. The graph at the bottom shows the change by committee of corporate risks. So just worth noting the increase in risks for the Audit and Assurance Committee and latterly the Digital Governance and Safety Committee over the last 6 to 9 months. And I'll come on to talk about that. Because on the right hand side here, the graph shows of the 38 new corporate risks added to the corporate risk register during the last 18-month period. We've seen a particular increase in the number of financial risks, predominantly going on for scrutiny and oversight by this committee, and indeed an increase in the number of security risks, predominantly going on to the Digital Governance and Safety Committee for scrutiny and oversight. In terms of how they break down by strategic mission, board members will be aware that we approved our board assurance framework report in July, and we're now assigning corporate risks to our strategic missions or strategic objectives, and the breakdown is shown there. So I will pause there, and then take any questions on that, or carry on to the cover paper and then move on to the deep dive, Chair.
Well, I suggest as there aren't any hands up, perhaps we'll proceed and then we can take all questions and observations at the end then, if you're happy with that. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Okay, thank you, Chair. So I'll just go back. The cover paper, page 241, sets out our current risk position. I'll just work through that. There's currently 26 risks on the corporate risk register. There's one risk assigned to the Audit and Assurance Committee, which is marked as private, so that will be taken in the private session later on today. In terms of movement on the corporate risk register since the last Audit and Assurance Committee meeting, there's been 6 new risks that have come on, one of which was assigned to this committee. That was the DPIF funding letters risk. There's been 2 risks that have been downgraded. They both relate to assignment to the Digital Governance and Safety Committee, but they're set out within the papers. And the heat map under section 3.5 of the report just highlights our risk profile position. And as mentioned in the slides, the corporate risks currently assigned to this committee are set out within 3.7 of the cover paper. So there's the 2 that I mentioned earlier that have been on the corporate risk register for that 18-month period. The majority of the remaining risks are those that we will be doing a deep dive, those that are financial risks. So to ensure we have sufficient time on that, Marion, I'll hand over to Claire, who's going to walk us through each of the financial risks and the deep dive in terms of mitigating action that have been taken to date and any further action.
Yeah, Chris. Claire.
Thank you, Chair. So as you're aware, we had 7 of those risks highlighted. Some of those related to funding letters, which we've now resolved. Some of those are related to additional funding, whether they're in the ICT area. But the key ones that we're deep diving today, there's 3: digital inflation, energy costs, and national insurance update. So I'll take each one in turn, and there is a summary paper, but I'll try and bring it a bit to life. In terms of digital inflation, so this is a phrase I've tried to spin up and position not just within DHCW, but also with the directors of digital peer group, and it's really highlighting the changes that we're seeing in digital spend, and in particular in the last 6 to 12 months. That actually shows that prices are running at a faster rate than the underlying inflationary level. And there seems to be 3 factors that are really influencing that. One is exchange rates, and I think we can see recent volatility around that because many of our suppliers are linked to the US and our US suppliers. The other bit is that we're actually seeing a changing in some of the pricing models, particularly around licensing. So we recently finalized the Microsoft license, but we have a number of licensed products. And what we're seeing is changes in the market in the way that they are structuring those licenses that is increasing disproportionately than the price and cost associated with that. But in addition, there was, and this seems to be alleviating slightly, supply chain issues in relation to hardware supply. There was key shortages in the market, particularly around chips, that were then artificially pushing the prices up. So what we did in DHCW was to look in quite some detail by supplier on those 3 areas of risk to really understand what the implications were going to be, both in the short term, because we were already experiencing some key increases in some key areas, but equally to think about what that would mean for the next financial year and raise it and socialize it with the key decision makers. So what does that mean for DHCW? Well, when we did the calculation, and there was about 139 contracts that we evaluated above a certain threshold, the outlook for next year was just shy of £5 million. It was 4.8 million. a big factor in that was actually primary care, and when we underpinned that, there was one key contractor supplier that was influencing that. But we then checked with our other directors of finance to see if they were experiencing similar trends and similar influences. So digital inflation is having an impact and is expected to have an impact on DHCW. And it's an area that we really do need to understand and help our colleagues, our key stakeholders understand, because it's a cost that we will really struggle to mitigate given the growth levels that we're seeing. So that was really an area of digital inflation, and I'll bring Mark in later just in case I've missed any key aspects of that. Mark, did you want to come in now? Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Claire, and thanks for the update. This is an emerging issue, and it's one that Claire brought to the fore early on this year, and we've been doing a lot of research, and we continue to do a lot of research around the topic. I think one of the key points to note is the work we're doing with internal audit, in terms of not only the identification and quantification, but the monitoring, management and mitigation of digital cost pressures as well. So there's a piece of work that will emerge from the financial sustainability piece, which will hopefully inform how we proceed and manage ourselves and sort of arrange ourselves going forward.
And no doubt that will probably come up at the committee meeting next week as a key sector-specific pressure that we would like to highlight and raise with the committee to gain their appreciation and understanding of the complexities and the pressures that we have. So I'll move us on then to the next area of key risk, and this is probably close to everyone's heart around the table, which is really the energy cost and the energy price pressures that we're seeing, and what that implication is really for DHCW. So we have seen quite a significant increase following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And actually, we've seen prices at levels that previously were unthinkable, actually, in terms of the daily rate for gas and electricity. So when you look at DHCW in particular, there are two really key areas of energy consumption. And that's really our office space and our sort of office heating requirements. And then there is the biggest aspect, which is really the data center usage of our 2 data centers and the implication that they have. So just to give you a flavour of context, we spent last year 1.1 million on our total gas and electricity bill. Actually, we moved out of the into a new data center, which actually was energy efficient. So for ICT team, that meant that they saw forecast a reduction in their energy consumption as a result of that. So we were predicting about £1 million in terms of consumption requirement. We did actually then consider the price increase, and we forecast potentially a £400,000 cost pressure related to energy. And we've done the calculations for next year, and that's really looking at potentially a bill of around about 2 million in relation to our gas and electricity. I would say, though, that prices are moving, and we obviously have contractual arrangements associated with some of those, which for this year has helped to mitigate a lot of the pressures. But next year that will change. And therefore, we are looking at the impact of that together with our shared services colleagues in terms of their underlying price assumptions, but also with our colleagues around the directors of finance. So energy prices are a significant risk for us going forward, like everyone else. What we have to do is really understand our footprint and try and minimise the impact as much as we can. And as a result of that, during the month, we set up a bit of a task and finish group to work on understanding our assumptions. So Julie represented us from the corporate services with the offices, and equally we had Martin Prosser, who is our data center lead, work out and look at what options, if there are any options, we could do and consider to minimise that cost. So so that group met, they come up with a number of options, but the reality is those options are unlikely to mitigate the price impact that we are likely to see. So Mark, I don't know whether you wanted to add anything.
Yes, Claire, on that note, there's obviously a commercial element that feeds into the discussion regarding that actions and possible investment opportunities going forward. It does dovetail with some of the decarbonisation agenda, and that's high on the list of some of the options we've managed to come up with. I think what I would say is the way this dovetails with the Welsh Government view in terms of the central risk management of energy costs across the patch is that we obviously raise a risk within the organisation and look to mitigate it as best possible. But the underlying assumption at the moment is that the Welsh Government would seek to support the additional exceptional costs, and that will be part of our planning assumptions going into 23-24 as well.
Okay, and then the final risk, and this one is, I think the word I would use, we're being very agile in finance. We're faced with a lot of uncertainty that we're trying to manage and predict. So the national insurance tax increase. Now this one's a bit like the okie dokie. It's in and it's out, and it's out and it's in. But never mind. So to give you some flavour, that our national insurance bill is around about 4.5 million for DHCW. So it's not an insignificant aspect of our costs. So again, we were predicting an increase potentially of about 1.25%. And again, we continue to monitor this as and when we have more information, but really we were trying to acknowledge the fact that this is a risk, it's an increase in cost. Following on from the energy, Welsh Government recognised that. They recognised this was outside our scope, and for this financial year accepted it was an exceptional cost and enabled us to be funded. But obviously going forward, as we get more clarity around the requirement for that, we will monitor that risk and act accordingly. But again, this is just another additional cost to offset, and again, from a financial perspective, given the growth in our services, is just another impact on our long-term financial sustainability. So those are the key areas. Mark, I don't know whether there was anything on NI you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in, given and this is the interesting point of with in without that you mentioned, Claire, in terms of the Chancellor's announcement. Obviously, we've this would be downgraded from the corporate risk register. I think the question is around the probability. Under normal circumstances, we'd probably have a really low score, but who knows? But in terms of managing, as Claire said, this financial year, we'll be able to manage it as a non-recurrent pressure with support from Welsh Government. And in all probability going forward, it's not something you're going to see as part of the corporate risk register.
So to summarise, I think the financial risks, as you can see, we've got quite a number of those. We are pretty agile in this space. Those are the key areas of concern for this board meeting. I think it's also true to say that as we go into our planning session and as the organisation develops, at the moment we are still got a high level of vacancies and we're recruiting, and we've got a real focus on recruitment. Having that vacancy factor does mitigate a lot of the risks that we currently, underlying financial risks that we currently carry. And as you know, we've categorised financial management as a cautious risk. So we are willing to take on a little bit of risk in a structured financial way. It is reviewed as part of the monthly directorate routine. So every month, as part of the financial governance process, we review the underlying directorate position and we identify risks. We also do identify opportunities. And I'd also like to note that in a recent review with the financial delivery unit, we've also highlighted opportunities to offset that. And we've worked with our colleagues to support the underlying financial constraints that we're working with by looking at our contractual VAT position, but equally some of our underlying financial positions to enable us to be supportive to our colleagues within NHS Wales if we can as the year progresses. So thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions on those risks that we've highlighted.
Thank you, Claire. That's been a very clear resume of what is clearly a very challenging period of uncertainty. And I think it's been really helpful to receive those papers which highlight very clearly those key areas of concern. And as you rightly say, there are a number of financial risks, and it's very much a moving feast with a lot of uncertainty as to which way those risks will move over the coming months. So I'm inviting questions, observations from colleagues, and I'll start with Ruth Glazard. Ruth.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire. The piece of work on digital inflation is exceptional. Thank you. I think it's so helpful for us as an organisation to be able to articulate what the difference is in terms of the services that we provide and what that cost will be to the wider NHS. And I guess I would just say that as a committee and as a wider board, I think it's on us to make sure that that concept is widely understood and discussed across the sector, because it's not just us that will suffer from digital inflation. Obviously, our partners out in health boards deliver their own services that will impact on them as well. And whilst in some of the other areas, energy costs, we are impacted. Out in health board, I can imagine energy costs are probably more concerning to them because the digital inflation bit might be hidden. But when you take those two together, that's a real issue for our colleagues out there. So I think it's something that we need to make sure we keep up on the agenda in terms of us here at Audit and us at the wider board as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. That's really kind. I think the other bit I'd really like to highlight is there's a real asset in DHGW, and that's the commercial digital capability that we have and their insight being right at the front edge in that particular area to have a real nose for things like digital inflation, but also the particular niche requirements that a digital procurement has. So I know Mark and the teams work quite hard, but I think it's an acknowledgement to the procurement team who have really cover this and also build that risk in to contract negotiations wherever we can.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Ruth, for raising that. Mark?
Sorry, I was just going to echo Claire's comments because Michelle's team have done a hell of a lot of work in a short period of time in terms of the granular analysis that's had to take place with the team as well. So just to support what Claire.
Thank you. And I can see a couple more hands up. I'll go to Nathan Couch, Audit Wales, first of all, and then we'll take Marilyn Bryan-Jones, if we may. Nathan.
Sorry, Chair, I think Marilyn was before me, so I don't know if Marilyn wants to go first.
Absolutely. Marilyn, can you come in, please?
Hello. I just wanted to say, I just wanted to say about, that we've got the strategy about the plans of what we think it's going to cost us from a building point of view. Can we, from a people point of view, that's going to still be quite unknown though, isn't it? Because one of the things that has come to me is that more people are saying they're going to come into work. For instance, I spoke to a colleague the other day, and because the cost of living, they're really struggling. So they work in the offices and they're doing things like making sure their phone is charged and things like that, because they're really going to struggle when they go home. So, excellent report, but there's going to be a lot of unknowns for us because the people side of it, isn't it, as well?
You're absolutely right, Marilyn. And what we don't want to do is not encourage people where they need to come into the office. I think where we could be cleverer is really, if they are going to come into the office, is maybe optimize them being on the same floor, COVID allowing, rather than heat the whole building when they're all scattered. So, and also it would be nice, I think, to encourage that and maybe provide the environment that enables them to feel comfortable, and actually we're all in this together, aren't we, in some respects. But it's an important point. we have to balance the needs of the employee and the effectiveness of their working environment together with the CO2 and the financial implications. So it's a delicate balance, and I think as winter progresses and as the new ways of working comes together, this will be a real insight into actually the new working patterns for us at DHCW. But yeah, absolutely, we need to make sure there's a warm place for people to come and work.
Diolch, Marilyn. I think that's a really important point, and thank you, Claire, for raising it. Can I just build on that then in terms of what discussions are already in hand in terms of, you know, making best use of space? And you highlighted a number of potential options there. What discussions have already been taken?
So that's a good point. I might bring Julie in here, who was involved in those discussions. I don't know, Julie, if you wanted to comment.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Sorry, I was just popping my hand up there. Yes, so as part of the exceptional cost pressures group, we did identify the potential for rationalisation of our space, in fact, and we do monitor attendance on site at the moment. So we do know who's coming in and on what floors and areas and sites they're working. So we are going to be looking to do that. So we're going to be looking to redesign the space to make it more collaborative. And I think people do benefit indeed in Swansea. Now the staff have actually undertaken themselves to work in the same unit, so we can switch off the air conditioning in the remaining 4 units, so they all sort of work in unit 8. So that's the sort of process we're going to be looking to roll out across. And we're also encouraging as well sharing of accommodation. So for example, in North Wales, we have public health colleagues come in to share our space, that sort of thing. So yeah, I think there's loads of opportunities here, and you know, Marilyn makes a very good point about making space welcoming, and you know, staff feeling able to come in if that's their preferred way of working. So yeah, I hope that helps a bit.
Yeah, and also I would echo, and Paul would probably support me here. Is there's a role for the partnership group is working together. So if there are things that we need to change in light of when the temperature changes, that we work hand in hand to ensure we do that in the most appropriate and efficient way, really. So through that partnership working, we'll try and address any gaps as and when they arise, because we are having to be agile, I think, as we go.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you, Julie, for responding and giving us that clarity. Paul, do you want to come in as indicated by Claire there to build on that?
Yeah, just to support what Claire said, and it goes beyond the local partnership forum. As a trade union representative, we meet with workforce and OD colleagues, sorry, people and OD colleagues on a weekly basis. So if there are emerging issues, we're able to deal with them far quicker than waiting for the local partnership forum meeting to come around.
Diolch, Paul, and clearly this ties in very closely with that decarbonisation agenda, which we'll come back to in due course. Nathan, you're next, I think.
Thank you, Chair. Hiya, Claire. I just noticed that DPIF risks have been removed from the corporate risk register. Now, that obviously came out as quite a bit of a theme during our structured assessment field work as a significant risk to DHCW. I was just wondering what the change in position has been now since the field work has taken place.
Yeah, so if you remember, we were awaiting quite a number of funding letters from DPIF to clarify our allocation for this financial year. We subsequently had a JET meeting with so a joint executive team meeting with Welsh Government, where we raised that risk, and subsequently to that we saw a fluttering of letters come through the post, which therefore enabled us to financially get some security around our allocation for this year. I think it's true to say, though, Nathan, because of the timing of some of those, we have had to reprofile some of the spend, and we are going through a process. I think there's 2 tranches that we've undertaken, which enables us actually to give some of that move some of that allocation into next year. And there's pros and cons of that, obviously, but the reality is such that the timing of the notification has meant that we are unable to, in certain areas, procure or recruit to enable that spend to happen. So, you know, the risk for this financial year is gone. The DPIF process and substantiating our allocations earlier in the year is an opportunity to work closely with Welsh Government to get that far sharper than it has been.
I'm guessing this is going to be one of those risks then it could appear again back on the corporate risk there. So it's going to be fluctuate depending on what the situation is this time next year then, I suppose.
Yeah. Non-recurrent funding is a key area of concern for us going forward. And the reality is we're going to need increasingly more revenue than capital. And it's how do we work alongside Welsh Government to have a greater understanding of that allocation, given digital inflation, given energy, and also given the growth in our underlying requirements of our services. So we get the right balance between development and underlying resource. So I think they're certainly aware of those risks and opportunities, and in our future review with Welsh Government, we'll be raising a couple of options around that to help get that balance right between development and recurrent.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Claire. And I'm going to bring this discussion to a close. I think it's been a really helpful discussion, a really helpful deep dive, which certainly helps provide the committee with assurances that these risks are being appropriately reviewed and mitigated on a monthly basis. And can I thank Claire and the team for the excellent quality of the papers you've provided as a basis for this discussion as well. It really is very, very helpful. So diolch yn fawr I chi gyd am hynny. And I think this is a sort of discussion that we need to replicate potentially in other areas. And we are keen to hear from committee members, especially our new committee members as well, about areas of concern you would like us to shine the spotlight on over the coming months. Diolch yn fawr. So we note also Chris's presentation on the status of the corporate risk register and specifically that 18-month corporate risk trend analysis. Diolch yn fawr I chi gyd, a mi symudan ni mlaen rwan at yr eitem ar gydymffurfiaeth iaith Gymraeg. We'll move swiftly then on to agenda item 5.3, which is the Welsh Language Compliance and Improvement Framework. And it's my pleasure to welcome Eleri Jenkins, our Welsh Language Manager, to present the Compliance and Improvement Report, outlining steps taken to monitor compliance with those actions included in the draft Welsh Language Scheme. Croeso mawr Eleri, dyn ni'n falch iawn bod ti'n gallu ymuno efo ni y bore yma.
Diolch yn fawr, bore da pawb. So the Welsh Language Report covers compliance, as Marian just stated, and the action plan is at Appendix A for you. The Welsh language skills is also covered in the dashboard, and that's included in this report. The activities to promote the Welsh language is included, and an action plan to implement the More Than Just Words 5-year plan, which is at Appendix B. So going to the action plan for compliance, firstly, at Appendix A, it's a summary plan. There are 120 standards, as you know, included in our draft Welsh Language Scheme. So it's a summary plan and it's easier to manage. They've been grouped according to the standards, which are service delivery, policy making, operational standards and record keeping. And there are tabs, you will notice on the appendix, there are tabs across the bottom so that we can monitor improvement as we progress through the year. So if you go to the October tab on that spreadsheet, you will see that there are only 2 red areas at the moment. These are, we need standard operating procedure for education courses, and we also need a Welsh language policy, so the use of Welsh language internally. This is something I am currently working on, and it will be ready to coincide with the publication of our Welsh language scheme. So I'm happy that that one will turn green by the end of this year. So comparing, if you look at August and October in the tabs, you will see that recruitment has changed from red to amber. And this is because we're now advertising posts bilingually, which is excellent news. It's been a lot of work with the translators and the recruitment team, but all of our job adverts are now bilingual. There's still a long way to go with recruitment. We need to translate job descriptions, but obviously this is a huge piece of work that may take, you know, a year or two to get through them all, but hopefully we will make some progress over the next few months. The other area as well is to assess jobs appropriately for Welsh language skills. So that's an area of concern at the moment. I do believe that there are some jobs that are being advertised that should have been Welsh essential, and they're being advertised as Welsh desirable. So we have a bilingual skills strategy to address this with several standard operating procedures. But what I need to do next now is to promote that with recruiting managers, get that communication out there, get some training to the relevant people to make sure that we are assessing the jobs appropriately. So are there any questions on the action plan itself before I move on? Okay, so looking at our dashboard of compliance, so it's been we have reduced by 1% over the last month. So we're down at 67% in this dashboard. Actually, I looked at it yesterday and we're down to 66%. So another 1% this month, which means that we have more staff with level 1 skills. So the number comes down, the more staff have level 1 skills. So we are now at 1/3 of our workforce with some kind of Welsh language skills from level 1 and above, which is really good progress. In the last 6 months, that percentage has come down by 8% now, so which is fantastic news. So moving on to the training of staff. So I've listed in the report all the different training that staff are engaging with, and you might have seen on SharePoint and social media this week, as it's been Diwrnod Shwmae Shwmae. This is a day where we're encouraging people to start every conversation in Welsh. We have a quiz on Friday to end this Welsh week. So you're welcome to join that. So as you can see from the training, 85 staff learning with Duolingo, which is fantastic. They're all really enjoying that engagement on the Yama group and sharing their progress. And we've 6 staff have enrolled onto the Nant Gwrtheuyn residential course, which is an intensive course for Welsh speakers who lack confidence to hold a conversation in Welsh. And I've spoken to one who was just returned from Nant Gwrtheuyn, and she couldn't stop talking about it. She enjoyed it so much that she now has that new confidence to start using her Welsh in work. So we've got 6 staff enrolled in the next few months, which is great. So any questions on training or anything? Okay, so going on to the Welsh language scheme. As you know, the consultation ended on the 30th of September. In the meantime, I have been writing a report gathering all the consultation responses. So we had 7 email responses and some engagement on social media and the website. So this has all been put into a report for the Welsh Language Commissioner, and I have made some tracked changes to the draft Welsh language scheme. They will then look through this to see if they're happy with the changes. And I have a meeting with them in November to discuss this. So I am hoping we're on target to publish our scheme on the 7th of December, which is Welsh Language Rights Day. Diwrnod Mae Gen I Hawl, which is the Welsh Language Commissioner incentive to celebrate what you do to promote the Welsh language in your organisation. So that's going to be ours. Moving on to the More Than Just Words 5-year plan, which was launched in August at the Eisteddfod by the Minister for Health and Social Services. Both Marian and I have been very much involved in the development of that plan. The overarching theme is culture and leadership, and there are 3 specific themes that I've listed there in the report. So the Appendix B, which is an action plan of actions that I've pulled out of the report that are relevant to us. Again, I've got tabs at the bottom for each theme, as you will see. It's very much focused on workforce planning. So people on OD team will need to action these to implement this more than just words plan. And I have a meeting with them this afternoon, the team, to explain the process and what they need to do. I'm not overly concerned about what's in the plan because I've mapped it to the Welsh language standards, including in our scheme. So they're things that we are doing anyway. It's just making sure that we complete that action plan for more than just words to evidence it in the framework report that we're expected to produce then for Welsh Government. So that's the whole report. There are under the key risks section, we did have a letter from the Welsh Language Commissioner in relation to the joint review consultation. There was a particular focus on CANISC and capturing primary care information, but I have collated responses from our staff and Helen will have those responses for that committee, I believe this next week. That's it from me. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr, Leri. Adroddiad clir a chryno. Thank you very much for the clarity of that report. And really heartening to hear about the progress that's been made since you joined DHCW earlier this year. And perhaps worthy of note as well, particularly pleasing to see the Chief Executive of NHS Wales commend DHCW for the plans specifically regarding the Welsh language in our 3-year IMTP, which was presented a few months ago. So that was particularly pleasing. Can I just raise one point in particular, Larry, and it goes back to the area of concern that you highlighted in terms of appropriately assessing linguistic skills for specific jobs. Now, you mentioned the bilingual skills strategy and the standard operating procedures and the work that will be undertaken to promote those guidelines. Just a basic question from you, really. Are we convinced, are we happy that those operating procedures are fit for purpose and will lead to the improvements and the increase in the use of the language within DHCW?
Yes, I have recently renewed all of the standard operating procedures. So they are brand new, and I did consult with the people in OD team when we came up with these flowchart to assess jobs. We've also discussed it in the Welsh language group. So yes, I think they are fit for purpose. It's just getting that message out to staff to make sure that they are following the procedure now.
And finally from me, I can see another question from Ruth Glaser, then let's take that now, Ruth. Diolch.
Diolch, Marion, and diolch, Larry. Thank you for that update. It was very helpful. I think Chris might be about to comment on what my question was, because obviously, as a committee, we're responsible for the risks around the Welsh language scheme. And Chris did note earlier that we're looking at how those risks are presented to us, because I just want to make very sure that we've got the right risks that provide us as a committee and as an organisation with the right tools to be able to manage this and make sure we keep the right bits of this on the agenda for us, so that we can continue to support Ilaria in moving things forward. But I suspect that Chris might have just been about to comment on that.
Thank you, Ruth. Let's check out with Chris then.
So I was going to mention that because I do think it's important that we are targeting, as I mentioned in the previous section, we've had a good discussion. I think we can be a lot more specific around our Welsh language, which will allow us to be a lot more targeted around the mitigation. I think at the moment it's too generic to really make inroads. So that's something I think particularly around recruitment we're keen to do. So yeah, absolutely. And I had a couple of other points, Marion, if that's okay. One was just around the assessment. as Eleri said, had a good discussion at the last Welsh language group, and I think Eleri made some really important points for the members of that group around, it's not always a level 5 assessment that's needed for some of our roles. And so I think there was a good discussion. The importance of those members that sit on that group feeding information back to the wider organisation is really important. We've talked about the need for them. There's one Eleri, but we need champions throughout the organisation. So that was a good discussion. And the last point I wanted to just commend Eleri on for the work she's done. The 85 staff doing Duolingo at the moment. So that's nearly 10% of the organisation. So I've asked, well, we challenged ourselves at the last Welsh language group to see if we can get that up over 100 by Christmas, because in the spirit of sharing best practice and an enabling approach, I think that really is really good practice. So yeah, I think that's something we should be proud of, but which should continue to push.
Yes, definitely. Looking at the risks, what I'm doing is learning from the health boards, because at the moment they are under investigation for certain areas within the standards, and there's a big focus at the moment on recruitment and switchboard service desk communication. So that's what their focus is, and I think that's what our focus needs to be, to anticipate that before the Commissioner comes down heavily on us.
Diolch Eleri, and thank you, Chris, for updating us on the work and the feedback as well from the user group, which is very, very helpful. What we all want to see is increased use so that the language is visible, can be seen as well as heard, and I think we all have a role to play as board members. That's really important. But I'd like to echo Chris's words and to congratulate Larry once again on the sterling work that she's done to date. Promotion of the language is really important, and it's heartening to hear the increase in numbers who are so positively engaging with the language. Diolch yn fawr iawn, Larry.
Diolch yn fawr.
And we look forward to see you coming back to committee for further assurance in due course once the Welsh language scheme has finally been approved. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Diolch yn fawr. Yn fawr.
Hwyl, Debo. So thank you. That was a really helpful discussion, very constructive, I thought. So this takes us then, we're running about 5 minutes late, but it's fine. We're doing quite well in terms of time. So we move on now to the Standards of Behaviour report, which is Agenda 5.4. And I'm going to ask Laura Tolley, our Corporate Governance Manager, to present this report, which we're asked to note, and specifically to note the Declarations of Interest Register, which you have before you. Laura, croeso.
Diolch, Marian. I'll try and be quick for you to get some time back. But just as the committee are aware, we routinely bring a report covering declarations of interest, gifts, hospitality and sponsorship activities for DHEW. And at the last committee meeting, we reported for 2022-23, 34% of declarations of interest had been received for staff banded 8A and above. And I am really pleased to report at the time of writing this report for this meeting, 84% of staff banded 8A and above declarations of interest have been received, which is really great progress. And we are on track to achieve our overall compliance for 2021-22 rate, which was 87%. So I am hopeful at the next committee meeting that we'll be reporting that we've exceeded our last year's rates, which will be really good. So hopefully I'll be able to tell you that at the next meeting. At the last committee meeting, I mentioned that we were exploring the option of using ESR for staff to declare their interests, but this has changed as it's felt the ESR system at present doesn't quite have the required ease and reporting functionality for this, which I know it was something Ruth raised anyway. The Deputy Board Secretaries Network are exploring using an alternative system to capture declarations of interest, but it is felt at the moment our current internal system that we use for capturing these is sufficient. So any investments in software for that at the moment is not going to be taken forward for us, but we will sort of keep in the loop on that. Today we're just asking the committee to note that 2 declarations of hospitality have been received since the last meeting. Both are detailed within Appendix B of the report and have been approved by the relevant executive lead. And just to provide some assurance that the promotion work of standards behaviour does continue across the organisation. We have a new section on SharePoint on standards behaviour specifically, which includes a frequently asked questions guide, ongoing presence at corporate inductions, monthly communications still go out, and also a TENS talk has been scheduled to raise awareness in the area. And just the last thing to bring your attention to is, as you know, we are, as part of our commitment to being open and transparent as an organisation, we are pursuing best practice and asking all staff, regardless of banding, to complete a declaration of interest form. And to date, we've had approximately 14% of these from the wider organisation, which does sound low, but I think it's something that we can be quite proud of. I'm really pleased with the work that we are doing in this area to sort of try and get everybody to declare interests as a sort of signal of our demonstration for openness and transparency. So we're just asking, as you mentioned, Marion, everyone to note the report and the updates provided, and I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
Diolch yn fawr, Laura. That's very clear. Thank you for the clarity of your presentation and the detail included in that report. I'm going to invite Alistair for his contribution. Your hand is up.
Thank you, Chair. And Laura, sorry to be boringly picky. It looks like there is a duplication or an unintentional duplication on Appendix B on page 294. It does appear that Ridian Hurl's item has been simply stated twice on that page, but again, apologies for being picky.
No, that's okay. I'll have a little look at it and I'll address it outside the meeting if that's okay, Alistair.
Thank
Of
you,
course,
Alistair. Shows that you've been reading very conscientiously, so thank you for highlighting that. So if there aren't any other questions or contributions, the committee notes then the report and the work to populate the Declaration of Interest Register, noting also the declarations of gifts, hospitality, sponsorship and honorary declarations up to the 3rd of October of this year. Let's move on then to the high value purchase order and cumulative report. And I will now invite our Associate Director of Finance, Mark Cox, to present this report, which we are being asked to note. Mark.
Thank you, Marion, and Bolidar Palp. It's a very short report this period, only 3 items of note. I think just for context and just to give Marilyn and Alistair some awareness, what this report effectively presents is items of commitment in relation to orders over the board threshold of 750k, and also where they've cumulatively breached that threshold. And it was an area which Ruth brought up at some meetings ago regarding giving the committee some sight of what's bubbling under and what's tripping over as a result of cumulative orders. In terms of the singular orders over 750k, the one item refers to the GP Systems contract. You'll be aware that we manage the GP Systems contracts across Wales for the software and maintenance, and this refers to the 3rd quarter payments to EMIS, who actually cover some 179 of our practices across Wales. So that's a straightforward order in relation to the Q3 provision of service. That brings the total of single orders over 750k for the year up to £27,473,000. for the year. We'll continue to monitor that and report that to the Audit Committee as the meetings progress. In terms of the cumulative status, KNOS, who a third-party supplier who support delivery of the digital services for patients and public project, there's a number of 4 orders that have been generated over the period, which breach the threshold of 750k, and that's primarily to support the delivery of the private beta, which is going to go live later this month. We also have the ongoing purchase of vehicles or lease of vehicles, and we liaise with Northumbria NHS Trust in order to secure those vehicles on behalf of the employees. Must be said, I think there's an interesting sort of additional element to the leasing arrangements, and that's anecdotally I've seen an increase in the number of electric vehicles being leased over the period, and I think that could play into the discussions around the decarbonisation agenda, because I think these particular processes and facilities give employees the availability or the ability to purchase or lease electric vehicles when they normally wouldn't. So I think that's a major benefit of this particular relationship. There may be some overheads in terms of admin, but I think the benefits outweigh those particular issues. So those are the key items in terms of the notable events since the last reporting periods, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mark. That's very clear. I don't see any hands up for questions. So, yes, I can see Julie. Please come in.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to add to Mark's presentation, actually, in that we have seen increased requirement for electric vehicle charging on sites. So we have actually installed some additional points to address that.
Thank you, Julie. Well, that's very good to hear. So thank you for those contributions. And so the committee notes this report and the high value and cumulative high value orders raised to date. We'll move on then to the losses and special payments update. And I'm going to ask Claire Osmondson-Little to update us verbally on this issue. Claire.
There is nothing of note, so I'm delighted to say we have no special losses or payments this month, unless Mark's going to suddenly say something, but no. So we can move on.
Thank you very much for that update then, Claire, and good to hear that. We'll move on to agenda item 5.7 then, which is the procurement and scheme of delegation compliance report. And I will hand over now to Michelle Sell, who will provide an update in relation to the procurement activity that's been undertaken between June the 1st and the end of August of this year. Michelle, croeso.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yes, so in accordance with standing orders, the report is covering any single quotations or single tender actions that have been undertaken by the organisation, and then also any contract extensions outside of the original term. So there are, I'm not going to go through the detail of all of them. Please to take any questions. There are 2 single quotations that have been undertaken during this period. And then there are 6 contract extensions. You'll note 2 of those are actually at a 0 value or haven't impacted on the anticipated expenditure under the agreement. But nevertheless, they're reported to Audit Committee anyway, because they are extensions to term, so understanding orders. The one I was just going to call out, because it is at a relatively significant value, colleagues will have noted, which is probably the last extension in the pack. And a number of colleagues would have been present when I brought a paper to the SHE board actually in March in relation to this contract. This is a service that we stood up during COVID to support contact tracing. So part of the test, trace, protect, I never get my mouth around that one, service that we provided with Welsh Government. And we did actually run a procurement to replace this service toward the end of last year. We got to the position in March, and I should say this activity is led by the Digital Pathways Group, which is a group which is chaired by Welsh Government colleagues in relation to our COVID response. And two things happened. I think there was a conclusion that as a result of the procurement, we weren't in a position to proceed to award. So that can happen. I think the three options that have been put forward were not considered suitable at that point, so a decision was made not to progress. And also what was happening at that point was that Welsh Government were reviewing the response to COVID as the pandemic was developing, and the strategic response was also adapting accordingly. So what we have seen in the period is quite a significant decrease in the use of that service as the contact tracing service itself has changed, as I said, in response to the pandemic. So it was a contract we were asked to exercise the extension so that that service continued to be available as and when required. And it is now part of, I think, the wider considerations about how we're managing our response to the pandemic and what the future service provision looks like. But I thought it was worth just pointing that out for the committee because it's quite a significant increase in value, but a necessary service, and also pretty worth noting it is subject to volume and call off. So as I said, we reduced the volume of contact tracers quite significantly in line with the service, so the values are decreasing in terms of the call offs from that contract. But happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Michelle. Very clear, detailed. I don't think there are any questions. So on that basis then, we note as a committee the contents of the procurement activity in this report. Diolch yn fawr, Michelle. Let's move on then to the Quality and Regulatory Compliance Update Report. And I'll now invite Paul Evans, who is our Interim Head of Quality and Regulatory, to present this update report, which includes 2 planned external ISO quality audits this period. Paul, over to you. Croeso.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just pull up a couple of key points from the report, if I may. You mentioned the external audits. The external audits in Q2 were completed successfully. They were surveillance visits for ISO 9001 and ISO 14001, and there were no non-conformities raised for either standard. The report mentions 2 upcoming reports in Q3. They've actually already been conducted in the first week of the quarter. Again, these were focus visits ready for recertification for both ISO 9001 and 14001. No non-conformities raised for either, although 3 opportunities for improvement were noted. So a very successful audit period. The onboarding plan for iPassport is progressing well. Currently 41% of the organisation's teams are either fully onboarded or in the process of onboarding. A slight decrease in IMS documents within due date, but that's largely due to the iPassport onboarding process, where documents are being migrated across from the SharePoint IMS system onto iPassport. So once the migration is complete, that figure will rise, and in future I'll be reporting figures for a combination of IMS and iPassport as we migrate more and more documents across. I just wanted to quickly mention the quality portal. It continues to be a focal point for quality related activity, and we've seen an 18% increase in visits to the quality portal during the last quarter. So we reported just over 26,000 visits to the quality portal, viewing things like internal audit reports, quality improvement action list, and other such quality related activity. The work is progressing well to ensure that the organisation are in a position to meet the updated medical device regulations, which are due to come into force on the 1st of July 23. The team are currently assessing our existing service portfolio against the MHRA guidance on medical devices, and 40% of our services have been assessed to date. The Cyber Resilience Unit are progressing well with their cyber risk analysis workshops with health boards and trusts, and they were intending to complete those by the end of this month. And their recruitment has been finalised for the key vacancies that were mentioned in the last report. Our risk-based internal audit programme is live and is currently 92% compliant with plan. The 8% we're down is because we missed 1 audit due to audit illness in the summer. but that's been rescheduled for this month, so we'll be back to 100% compliance by the end of the month. And just finally, I mentioned our quality improvement action list figures in the annual report at the last committee meeting, and you may recall they started at when we started reviewing them at 55% within date. We met the improved KPI of 90%, updated that to 95% within due date, and the team has achieved that in the last quarter. So we're currently running at 97% of quality improvement actions within the due date. And that's it for me. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, Paul. Thank you, Paul. Are there any questions or observations? I think you've presented that information very clearly, Paul. So we are being asked to note the content of that update report, and noting also that it's been a very successful audit period. So thank you for your work on that. We'll move on then to the legislative assurance framework. So I'm now going to invite Laura Tolley back to present this framework, which forms part of our overall governance assurance framework. Laura.
Diolch, Marion. So just a bit of background, DHW are responsible for complying with legislation that's applicable to the Special Health Authority, and the legislative assurance framework, as you mentioned, forms part of the overall governance assurance framework, the requirements of which are outlined in our standing orders, and this is to address the legal, regulatory and contractual requirements of DHW. And in addition, the compliance assessment also supports the achievement and maintenance of the ISO and BS accreditations that are held by the organisation. So just to say, the legislative assurance framework is very much a joint effort between the corporate governance and quality and regulatory team, and I am really grateful for Paul's support and the team for helping us to develop the legislative assurance framework, which can be found at 5.9i Appendix A. And in addition, we're working together to ensure that the relevant processes outlined in 3.2 of the report are in place going forward. So the plan is the register is maintained by the quality and regulatory team and is reviewed both by the IMS assurance group and quality and regulatory group on a monthly basis. And this committee will provide oversight and scrutiny of the legislative assurance reporting against compliance on behalf of the SHA board on a biannual basis. This is the first time the register has been presented to the committee, and it can be found in Appendix B. And it's just to say that work is ongoing. Executive directors and operational leads are currently reviewing the register to ensure that adequate controls are in place, and the register will continue to be updated with IMS Assurance and Quality and Regulatory Group oversight of this. So today we're asking the committee to approve the framework and to note the register, and I'm happy to take any questions, but equally happy that Paul's here, who I've been working closely with it to help me answer any if needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Diolch yn fawr. I'm going to turn to Ruth first of all for her contribution. Ruth.
Thank you. As a principal, I'm not a massive fan of registers, because when you put stuff on a register, it immediately becomes out of date. So I guess it would be helpful to understand as a committee what we do to make sure that this is as up to date and actually as useful as possible, and that it's not just a list of stuff that's going to become up to date, out of date, and then it's a load of work for you and Paul and others to update it on a periodic basis. So it would just be helpful for me to understand a bit more about how we use that and make sure that it's helpful to us, as opposed to a document sitting around that will get audited on and be found to be out of date on at some point.
Do you want to take that, Laura? Thank you, Ruth. So the intention with this, I fully support what you're saying about registers becoming out of date. The original intention was just that, but it would be a live register. I don't want that, so that's not the way we're going to use it. The intention from the framework is that we provide updates twice a year to this committee. So once the comments are in for the end of this actually end of Q2, so the some statements are a little bit behind. But once we get the position for this quarter locked into the register, this register will then be archived, uploaded to the quality management system, and it'll be correct at a point in time. And then a new version will be created for Q4, which is the second reporting period, and then updated statements will be placed in that. And again, at the end of the period, it'll be locked down, so it's correct at a point in time.
Thank you, Paul. Ruth makes a good point. It needs to be helpful, and I think from what we've heard from Paul now, that is certainly the approach. I can see that Claire wants to come in as well. Claire?
Yeah, one thing that we weren't particularly strong on in the past was doing the horizon scanning and really trying to be, rather than reactionary, proactive around regulation. So I agree, it's getting the right balance, I think. It's about validating when we see something, have we captured that, and is it registered with DHCW, and is somebody doing something about it? Rather than being sort of on the back foot and something arrive and we haven't done that. So I think it's a good validation tool, but like anything, it doesn't want to be like a book on a shelf. We want actually to be a utilizable type of support. So I think it's probably, we need to keep ourselves honest and make sure it doesn't become a book on a shelf, and we are using it proactively around that and try and get the right balance between the two, really.
Thank you, Claire. That's a really helpful observation. We need to keep ourselves honest, but it is a good validation tool, as you say, which should prove to be very helpful for the organisation going forward. Are there any further observations or comments? If not, then we're being asked to note the legislation assurance register, but crucially, can I ask whether colleagues are happy to approve the legislative assurance framework that's before us? Happy to do that? Thank you. So the legislative assurance framework then is approved. We'll move on then to the decarbonisation, estates and compliance report, and that's agenda item 5.10. And I'm going to invite Julie Ash to present this report, which we are being asked to note for assurance. Julie.
Thank you, Chair. Right, so we're on page 369 now. So as the Chair mentioned, this report relates to information around the estate, which includes progress against our decarbonisation plan, ISO 14001, and compliance and health and safety. So first thing I think to mention is we did have it on the consent agenda. We submitted our first qualitative return to Welsh Government, which was a narrative report on our progress against our decarbonisation action plan. So that was submitted on time in September, and we will be due to submit 6 monthly returns from now on in. I mentioned, I think, under an earlier agenda item, that we do link in with Welsh Government in terms of this work. So we are part of the Welsh Government community of experts on climate change. So we attend regular meetings of this forum. In fact, we're due to present at the next meeting in November. I mentioned the community of experts group, but also I think I referred to it earlier, the fact that we're going to now be joining the transport and procurement workstream group, which I think is vital because, as Claire alluded to, a large amount of our emissions is actually due to procurement. So I think we really need to get underneath that. So we'll be working closely with shared services on that. We also mentioned earlier how cloud contributes to decarbonisation and the need to really do a bit of work around that. So we're linking in with the Microsoft Centre of Excellence to try and get a bit of more of an understanding on that. And that was actually emerged as part of the internal audit report that Shared Services recently issued for us. I think Paul stole my thunder with ISO 14001. So I was just going to mention we'd had a very successful audit of that with just one opportunity for improvement and no non-compliances found. With regard to estates compliance, I'm happy to report that we're at 97%, which is above our target of 90%. And finally, I wanted to mention Welsh Government led a peer review of all NHS Wales decarbonisation action plans in July. So we were an active participant in that. And as well as submitting our qualitative, the narrative return, we've also submitted our emissions return, and that was also due in September. So that's been acknowledged by Welsh Government as being submitted on time. I was going to mention the internal audit report, which we've talked through. So I just wanted to say I found that very helpful. The All Wales recommendations as well as the specific DHCW one. And just finally to touch on something we've already mentioned, the exceptional cost pressures group and how we can link decarbonisation into that in reducing our utilities and subsequent emissions. So I think that's probably all I was going to mention. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Julie. And as you've alluded, we have already explored some areas of this report in previous discussions this morning. Understandably, you know, there are overlaps, and that is quite natural. Thank you for presenting that report, Julie. Are there any questions or observations from colleagues at all? I don't think there are. So thank you again, and the committee notes the content of this report, the Decarbonisation Estates and Compliance Report for Assurance. And I think the fact that there are no questions probably points to the fact that you provided a comprehensive and clear report, Julie, which in itself answers any queries or concerns that this committee might have. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair.
That brings us towards the end of this committee. We've actually saved some time, as you can see, which is no bad thing. Now, we will need to work on a highlight report to board from this committee. I will work with Chris to draw up that, drawing attention to those areas of potential escalation that is included in the paperwork and in our discussions this morning. But I'd just like to invite you, colleagues, whether there are any areas that you think we should specifically highlight to board when we meet at the end of November. And I'm happy for you to feed that in writing outside the meeting if you think there are any areas outside the obvious discussion areas that we've had this morning. Okay, thank you. I don't have any other business on the agenda. Not been advised of anything that you wish to raise. So my intention, therefore, with your approval, is to draw this meeting to a close. The date of our next meeting is the 14th of February of next year. Thank you for your engagement and your contributions this morning, which has been particularly helpful. And I'd like to thank our colleagues in DHC Wales for the quality of the papers, which have, without exception, been very, very good. And we've come to expect quality papers, which is indeed what we've had this morning. So thank you all for your engagement in what I know is a very, very busy and challenging period for DHCW, as well as all health organisations in Wales currently. We are due to meet in private. Now, our scheduled timing is 12:20, Chris. Just want to check whether colleagues are wanting to bring that forward, because we finished this meeting earlier. Probably makes sense. I think that all those members who are expected to join us in privately are currently around this board table. Gareth and Stephen, are you happy to bring this meeting forward? I was going to suggest perhaps that we have a short break of 5 minutes, and if you are all happy with that, Chris, what do you think? Shall we start early?
Yeah, we just need, there's Carwyn is going to join us, Marion, so I'll just get in touch and let him know we're going to start. Is 10 past okay, Marion, just so I've got time to make sure he's ready?
That sounds fine with me. Are you all happy to start at 12:10 then? Thank you very much. Let's do that. Thank you again for your support, and we'll reconvene for the private session at 12:10. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Ad y bo chi.
Thank you all.
Thank you.